everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you the most elegant design from this season for sure, and I would venture to guess my most elegant, like, I don't know, just simple but really pretty design I've ever done, and this is pumpkins. It is 3 different pumpkins that are all sculpted. It's a sculpted nail, a clear base, and it's got the vines that go around the sides and some leaves, and it's just so pretty. As soon as I did this one, I was just like staring at it because I loved it so much. It's just elegant and simple and extreme, all wrapped up in one. I hope you guys are as excited for this one as I am, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well. Bye!
So we're going to begin by cutting the extension area off of one form and sticking it on to the end of the extension area of the second form to make one really long form. I'm going to pinch the end shut and then open up the back, fit the form onto my practice finger, close the bottom, and then I'm just going to make sure it's fitting well. I took it off and replaced it a little bit, cut the sides open so that it fits really nice and close, pinch it down, and you're going to want to pinch it to the length that you want the nail to be. So if you don't want it to be the whole entire length of the form, just close it up to the length that you intend to sculpt your nail to. Then blend the nail down to the form with some clear acrylic just so that there's a smooth transition from the natural nail to the nail form. And then with a warm orangey brownish glitter mix with maybe a little red if you want to make things interesting, we're going to be applying that from the cuticle area all the way down. So you're going to just blend it down. So you don't want it to be a solid glitter nail from cuticle to tip, you just want it to kind of fade out. Sculpt the rest of the stiletto with clear acrylic, so you're going to encapsulate the glitter that you did apply and then continue sculpting your stiletto all the way down to the length that you want it to be, so that there will be different levels of glitteriness in this nail. So it'll be really glittery and completely cover up the nail bed so that you don't have any natural nail showing through, and then completely clear without any glitter at the tip. Just make sure that as you are sculpting this, you build in a healthy apex and that the shape in general is looking pretty good. Keep in mind though that with all the 3D art that's going to go on top of this, that will effectively act as an apex, so you may not need to be quite as thick on the sculpting as you would normally. Just make sure that the nail looks good from all angles, and then we're going to remove the form carefully, and after you have that form released, you're going to file the nail into shape with a hand file. The reason I'm using a hand file instead of my e-file as I would normally do is there really isn't that much filing to be done here, and an e-file just does not work as well on these really super extra long nails. If there was a certain area or spot that had bulk, you could use it to bring that bulk down, but you would still want to go over it with a hand file to make sure that all of your lines are crisp and clean and straight. So for me, since I didn't really have any really big bulky areas, using my hand file just from the beginning was the way to do it. So now I'm going to begin sculpting my first pumpkin, and for me, I'm going to do 3 different colors of pumpkin, and the first one I want it to be a really, I don't know, like a sort of muted orange pumpkin shade. And to do this, I'm actually going to start out with a really rich scarlety red color. And the way that I have my pumpkins sort of arranged is that you can see the back of the pumpkins, like there's the bumps of the pumpkin that are behind the stem, and so I have some of those visible and then some of the pumpkin bumps in the front visible too. So I'm going to do the back ones first. So I'm going to do 2 and then 2 on the sides from that. And then after I have those first layers done, I'm going to take a dark brown acrylic, so either a dark brown or like a darker red or just some shade that's darker, and I'm going to be doing some shading right in the creases of all of those different sections, and then using a pastel orange. So this is really high contrast from the colors that were used previously. Very big difference. We're going to be highlighting our pumpkins, and when you brush that highlight color over, it might blend in with your brown a little bit to give you some more color variances, and it'll just give you this almost frosted appearance, which, like I said, kind of plays into that muted tone. So once you have the first little bits of your pumpkin done, you're going to repeat the process with the front layers of the pumpkin. So I'm going to begin with that first middle one, kind of press that out. That first bead I grabbed really could have been larger just to cover that whole area with a little bit more ease, but I'm going to just use the tip of my brush to carve in the shapes of those last 3 sections of the pumpkin. Once I have those done, I'm going to be building it up even further, adding some more height. This design is extreme in multiple respects. It's extreme length for one thing. It also has the little leaves that kind of extend outside the nail, which add some extra craziness to it. But then the pumpkins themselves actually build up quite a bit of height. So you want to make sure that each of these sections of the pumpkins has its own space. It's not all the same level. There's not like a pancake syndrome happening. There's really nice, rich 3D height built in. Just like we did before, we're going to add a little bit of brown shading to these last sections. I'm actually going to go through and add more of that pastel orange color. I think it's called Dreamsicle. It's one from Young Nails. It's a color I've had for a very long time, and it's one that is, I just like it. It's a nice creamy color, but it is so pale. It is almost white, and in fact, in the video, it almost does look white. It's just that color made this look almost kind of like a vintage design because it isn't that bright orange. It's not over the top. It just gives the whole thing this really nice, subtle, frosty glow to it. So we're going to be just adding more of it to the rest of the pumpkin, letting those first layers or those last layers that we just did cure a little bit longer so that the colors don't blend in, and then add your little bit of a frosty glow to the very middle of the last section of the pumpkin. So don't do it on the edges or just the top or the bottom or anything, but right kind of down the middle. We're going to repeat the process for our next pumpkins. So the first pumpkin, or I guess the next pumpkin down, the second pumpkin, is going to be sort of a whitish greenish color scheme, and I'm going to begin with gray. And instead of doing all of the pumpkins lined up like they're stacked perfectly, you know, bottom to stem, we're going to tip the last two so that they're on their angles. So this one is going to be tipped ever so slightly to one side. You can pick either side, it doesn't really matter, but you're going to do the same process. The other thing you might want to do is shrink the size of your pumpkin down slightly, depending on the size of your nail and how much space you have. You may or may not want to shrink this one down too much, but just a little bit could help. Another thing that you could do to just add some variety to your pumpkins is there's so many different pumpkin shapes. You've got the ones that are really tall and skinny. You have the ones that are shorter than they are wide. There are some pumpkins that are almost perfectly circular. They're like a beach ball. There's some variety there that you can play around with too. So instead of just varying the color of your pumpkins, you could also add just some differences in their shape and their size too. Some of them, the sides of them are really straight up and down. Some of them bow a little bit. Some of them are wider at the top than they are at the bottom. You get the picture. So you can just have some fun with that too. On this little middle pumpkin, I added kind of a grass green color as my shading in color. So the area between each of the pumpkin sections, I'm going to be applying that green color. Don't overdo that green color. You want it to be just sort of a subtle hue. You don't want it to be like green stripes, if you will. And then some white acrylic for my highlighting. The last section we're going to be doing down the middle. And then on the bottom of that one, since you're not going to have the sides to shade in, just apply a little bit of that green right at the base of that section, and then apply the white down from the top down the middle. Just like so. Once you are done with that pumpkin, you get to do the last one. And for that one, I wanted it to be a little bit more yellowish, the very top pumpkin that I did, while orange is more of a red orange. And for this one, I want it to be more of the yellow tone oranges. And this one's going to be tall and skinny too. So I think that is a nice little change of pace. So we're going to be repeating the exact same process to sculpt the last one. I'm going to begin with yellow, and then I'm going to use an orange, a nice rich orange color. You don't want to be too bright or neon, but just like a classic pumpkin orange. You're going to be doing the darker shading areas on that. And then when you get around to it and you're going to be doing the highlighting colors, a pastel yellow. Same kind of a process as your first pumpkin, a very pale pastel yellow. Again, this is actually from the Young Nails Pastel 3D. I don't know if it's their, I don't know what the kit is, but it's their sculpting acrylics or 3D acrylics, although they probably don't even make those anymore. Everything is switched over to slick pour, so I don't even know what to compare it to. Like I said, I've had these a while, but it's just a really nice, almost white yellow. And then we're going to do the very last section down to the very middle, kind of continue that, press it out, bring it down. As you're sculpting these pumpkins, you'll find that you get quicker and quicker the more that you do. It does help that they're getting smaller as well. But now we're going to be sculpting vines. So on a nail form backing, we're going to take some nice bright green acrylic and we're going to just sculpt a straight section out of it. Let the acrylic set up for a minute before you go to pick it up. After it is set up just enough where it turns into almost like a putty or Play-Doh texture, then you can press it into that long snake shape. Let that set up just a little bit more. Don't wait too long. Pick up that snake, press it into one of the tops of the pumpkins, and then swirl it around and tuck it underneath a different pumpkin. So you're going to be doing these little vines from the top of the whitish greenish pumpkin, the top of the yellow orangish pumpkin, and then kind of just around the very tip of the nail. That last vine is just an extra one. Instead of doing a vine sculpted separately for the top pumpkin, that one is actually going to be just sculpted directly on the nail since you aren't continuing it off the nail into air. If you want to, you can secure that vine with a little bit more of green acrylic just so it's not going to go anywhere. You can either do each one separately, which is what I did. So I took a moment and made sure they weren't going anywhere. Or if you want to, you can just sculpt all of these little vines, attach them, and then secure them later. That's sort of a up to you type of a decision. So we've got this next vine. Once it is pick up a bowl, we're going to pick it up, press it into the top of the next pumpkin, swirl it around, curl it around, try to make it swirl in a different kind of a way than the first one. You don't want it to look too even and symmetrical. You want it to kind of have its own personality. If you want to, you can give it a little loop-de-loop. You don't have to. You can just sort of play with that. For the very last one, make it skinnier and smaller. You don't have as much space to continue it from, and it isn't going to be attached to a pumpkin, so it's not going to have that bigger stem base that it needs. I'm going to pre-attach a little swirl in it, just so that when I pick it up, I have more of a like pre-built-in shape to it. So I'm going to pick that last one up, wrap it right around that clear tip of the nail, just like so. It looks so cute. I love these so much, and those little curly cues are adorable. And at this point, if you haven't already, go back through and add a little bit more acrylic to your vines if need be. Secure them to the nail wherever they are kind of resting on it. So if they happen to just be leaning up against it here or there, add a little bit more acrylic just to add some strength and security. This nail is actually quite delicate in the end, especially with those leaves. So if you wanted to make it more strong and durable, don't extend these little vines out past the nail. Those themselves are pretty strong. And then you'd also want to skip and not do the leaves. So it'd be kind of up to you. You can decide how much strength you want to give it. For the last little vine, like I said, we're going to sculpt that directly on the nail coming out of the top pumpkin. So just add that little bit of green going right up into the proximal fold so it rests at the top of your canvas. And then we're going to use some darker greens and either a brown or a tan color, just, a few different colors to add some variance, some variety, and some shading on your vines. And to do this, you can, sometimes pumpkin vines, I know after they've been picked especially, they're no longer green. They don't have that really rich green color to them anymore. They're more of a gray or a brown color. So if you wanted to give it more of that coloration, you certainly could have from the beginning. Since mine almost look like they're connected from one to the next where they may not have been picked yet, I decided to let them stay more of that rich green color, but still toning it down just a little bit with some of that brown. You're just going to want to do that on each stem or each piece of the vine, so don't forget the one on the bottom as well, adding some shading where they attach to the pumpkin with a little bit extra attention. So I'm going to cut off 3 pieces of a fine jewelry wire. This is a very, very thin wire. It is very soft and bendy too, which is part of where the delicate quality of this design comes in. So we're going to take each of those wires and we're going to glue them wherever you feel like there should be a leaf, keeping in mind that it would be most aesthetically pleasing to attach them onto one of the vines. So if you want to have one up near the cuticle area, you could glue one kind of in that zone. Otherwise, off of each of the vines that are lower on the nail. And if you wanted to do more or less of these leaves, you could certainly switch that up. And like I said, if you are really concerned about this nail being delicate and breaking, skip this. Just skip this part. You could even just attach some leaves to the vines and not give them a separate stem. Now I'm going to secure those little wires in place as best I can with some of my green acrylic. After this step, you'll see this eventually. I was a little impatient with letting my acrylic dry. I just wanted to bend these wires into place and keep moving. I was really excited to get to the next stage of this design, and I just did not let them cure enough. So I did a little bit of fixating, which you can see right there. I had to reattach that one piece of wire. You really should let your glue dry before you try to cover up these wires with the green acrylic. And then after you do let the wires or let the acrylic set, make sure it's fully set before you try to bend them, because otherwise your wires are just going to fall right out, which is no fun at all. But sometimes when you're just in that creating mode, I know for me, I don't really like to wait for things to dry or cure. I'm just like, no, I got this. It'll be fine. I'll just keep going. It'll be fine. And then I end up taking longer because I have to go back through and fix things. Pretty much how the cookie crumbles there. So we're going to just make sure all of those wires are nicely, securely attached, and then please don't mess with them too soon. Once they are ready, you can just bend them into gentle curves. Don't do it too soon, but just give them a nice little swooshy shape with your fingers. If you're using a wire that's not as soft as mine is, you may find that you need to use some tools, some jewelry bending tools to, let's see that one. It's like, nope, I'm not going to stay here. Sometimes I wonder. But you're going to just cut them into the shape. I'm going to re-glue that one in where it belongs to make sure it's actually going to be there when I'm ready for it. Oh man. And then after you have all of them done and they are actually secured where they're supposed to be, you can go through and you can cover your wires with some green gel paint. So I actually double dipped my paintbrush and went into green gel paint and then into brown gel paint. The ones I'm using are ones that do not require a top coat. If yours do require a top coat, you will also have to top coat these little bits of wire. After you have that done, then we're going to be sculpting our pumpkin leaf on a nail form backing with some of the lovely green acrylic we used to sculpt our vines. So the very first color that was used. You're going to give this a very pokey looking leaf. Press it out, use the tip of your brush to carve in some of the texture and the veins in the leaf. Once that leaf has set up approximately 50%, somewhere in that family, where it isn't going to, it's not going to bend or move more than 50%, probably 90%. And it's not going to, the shape you carved isn't going to be ruined by picking it up. You're going to pick it up and set it on your wire. After it's on the wire, if you'd like to, you can give it a little bit of shape with your brush. I let that one just sort of naturally flow down a little bit, just so that they aren't stick straight. If you aren't worried about your leaves being stick straight, you can sculpt them all right away and then let them fully cure before you pick them up and just glue them to the end of your wire. Otherwise, if you do want them to have just a little bit of a movement to them, you will want them to have just a moment to sort of relax on the wire and take on some different shapes. Here is my next little leafy. As you work your way down the nail, you may consider making your leaves slightly smaller with each one that you go. That leaf did not want to stick to my wire. If that's the case, don't worry about giving it the extra shape. If you can chase it down, just go ahead and glue it in place. Sometimes these things just have a mind of their own, and I'm going to glue that one, and it's all good. In fact, it didn't even want to be glued. That leaf had it had a vendetta against my plan here. So we're going to make sure that one's stuck. After it is attached well enough where I can flip it over and it's not going anywhere, I secured it to the wire with some more of that green acrylic. Here's the last leaf, slightly smaller than the other ones, just to give it think of it like the stiletto. The stiletto is wider at the, where it attaches to your finger, and it continues to get narrower and narrower as it goes down. Do the same thing with your pumpkins. The very top one should be the biggest, and then they should get smaller as they go down the nail. The vine should get more narrow as they go down the nail. The leaves should get smaller. It all blends into that pinched shape. It all gives it that same look. Once you have the final leaf attached, take some of your darker green and or your brown that you used on the vines and add some more depth to it. If you were able to carve in some of the veining with the tip of your acrylic brush when you're sculpting the leaves, the darker shade of acrylic will settle into those little carvings and it will give you such a nice, very effortless, beautiful effect. Now we're going to do some very subtle outlines and details with acrylic paint. At this point, this is completely optional. I wouldn't even say it adds a whole lot. It makes things look a little more crisp and clean, but if you want it to be a little bit smoother looking, a little bit softer, then skip this step. It really is not something that is absolutely written in stone that you have to do. And I went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to do it or not because I loved the soft, subtle look that my pumpkins had, and I couldn't decide. Evidently, I did decide to go through with a little bit of acrylic paint, and I do like the way that looks as well, but I don't think it was enough that if you didn't feel like painting it, that you should beat yourself up about that. Just add a little bit here and there, black outlines if you decide to. If not, call it a day. All you would have to do if you didn't do the black outlines is be happy with it, and you'd really be done because you wouldn't need to apply any top coat unless you wanted to the background or to make anything shiny. If you didn't want to change the sheen of anything, you wouldn't have to do anything. However, if you do want to make some of it glossy, you would need to apply some glossy gel sealer over whatever sections. For me, that is going to be the background. So that stiletto nail, while doing that and you're making the stiletto nail glossy, it's going to make it a little bit more clear. So it's going to amp up that clarity, making it so certain sections of the nail almost disappear. So for instance, where there is the vine wrapping around the tip, it almost looks like the nail isn't there and it gives it a floating effect. I'm going to apply a layer of matte top coat over any 3D elements that happen to be painted. So that is basically all of my 3D elements for me, but you may be able to skip that step if you didn't do any painting. And that is it. This nail is extreme and it is so beautiful. It is probably one of my favorites from this year, even though it isn't over the top gruesome Halloween. It's just so elegant and so simple, yet extreme and over the top. So I hope you guys are excited about it as I am, and I will see you next time. Bye!